The mist clung to the pines like reluctant ghosts, refusing to yield to the autumn sun that struggled to pierce the canopy. It was early October in the remote northern woods of Montana, that transitional time when summer's warmth battled winter's approaching chill, creating days of unpredictable beauty. Dew sparkled on fallen leaves, and the earthy scent of decomposing foliage filled the air with nature's most primal perfume. The hunter moved with practiced ease through the underbrush, each step calculated and silent. At 47, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent nearly 20 years traversing these same hunting grounds. His weathered face, tanned and lined from decades under the open sky, betrayed a life lived outdoors. The hunting rifle, a Remington 700 passed down from his father, felt like an extension of his arm, familiar, reliable, trusted. Dawn patrol had always been his ritual. While most hunters in the region preferred to set up later, the hunter believed in becoming one with the forest before making his move. The woods need to accept you before they'll give anything up, he often told the younger hunters who occasionally sought his guidance. Those who knew him respected his almost preternatural ability to track and find game where others saw nothing. This morning felt different, though he couldn't immediately place why. The hunter paused, resting his hand against the rough bark of an ancient pine, and listened. 15 years ago, before the accident at the lumber mill that had cost him 2 fingers on his left hand, he might have dismissed the feeling. But experience had taught him to trust his instincts. Something was off. The usual symphony of forest sounds seemed muted. No distant chattering of squirrels. No woodpeckers hammering at tree trunks. Even the wind seemed hesitant, creating only the occasional whisper through the needles above. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool mountain air, and exhaled slowly, watching his breath form a small cloud that dissipated into nothingness. He thought of his wife, probably still asleep in their modest home at the edge of town, the home they had shared for 22 years. Their daughter had left for college last fall, the first in either of their families to pursue higher education. Pride swelled in his chest whenever he thought of her, studying environmental science, ironically inspired by the very forests he hunted in. The contradiction never bothered him. He understood the balance better than most. The hunter checked his watch. 6:17 a.m. He had promised to bring fresh venison for the town's annual harvest festival this weekend. The community counted on him, just as they had when forest fires threatened the eastern boundary 3 summers ago, and he had organized the local men into an auxiliary firefighting force before official help arrived. He adjusted his orange safety vest and continued forward, his boots making almost no sound on the carpet of pine needles. The mist was beginning to lift now, revealing more of the forest's secrets. A fallen tree, probably toppled in last month's unexpected storm, created a natural bridge across a small ravine. Near its base, something caught his attention. Tracks, but not the familiar imprint of deer or elk. The hunter knelt to examine them closer. Bear tracks, but unusually large and deep. A big male, probably. He frowned, mentally calculating the normal ranging patterns of the local black bear population. They rarely came this far down the mountain, especially this late in the season when they should be feeding heavily at higher elevations before hibernation. As he rose, a raven called sharply from somewhere above, the sound cutting through the unnatural quiet like a warning. The hunter glanced up, spotting the glossy black bird perched on a branch, its head cocked at an angle, eyes fixed on him with unsettling intelligence. Ravens were common enough, but something about this one's solitary presence felt like an omen. His grandmother, half Blackfoot and raised on the reservation before marrying his grandfather, would have had something to say about that. She had filled his childhood with stories of animal messengers and forest spirits. While he'd long ago replaced those beliefs with a more practical understanding of the wilderness, sometimes, in moments like this, those old stories resurfaced from the depths of memory. The hunter continued his trek, moving deeper into territory he knew well but rarely hunted. Game was usually sparse here, but today he wasn't following tracks so much as following his instinct, that inexplicable pull that had served him well throughout his life. The terrain grew rougher, with more rock outcroppings breaking through the forest floor. The trees changed, too, transitioning from predominantly pine to a mix including older-growth firs and the occasional ancient cedar. Half a mile further in, he noticed something hanging from a branch, a strip of bright plastic tape, faded yellow, fluttering weakly in the barely perceptible breeze. Trail marking was common enough, but not in this section of forest. which lay well outside the established hiking paths. The hunter approached, examining the marker. It wasn't the standard trail blaze used by the Forest Service or the local hiking association. Curious now, he looked for more and spotted another piece of tape about 30 yards ahead. Following these markers, he continued for another 20 minutes, the forest growing denser, the silence deeper. The sun had risen higher now, but little direct light penetrated this section of woods. The temperature seemed to drop the further he went, despite the morning's advancement. A fox darted across his path, startling him, not with its presence, but with its behavior. It showed no fear, instead stopping to stare at him with unblinking eyes before disappearing into the underbrush. Not normal. Not normal at all. Fox would typically avoid human contact at all costs. The hunter's hand instinctively tightened on his rifle. Something had disturbed the natural order here. He'd seen it before, when industrial waste had contaminated the creek on the western boundary 5 years back. The animals had acted strangely then, too. But there was no development in this section, no reason for such disruption. Ahead, the trees thinned slightly, revealing what appeared to be a small clearing. As he approached the edge of this open space, he saw it, a simple wooden post driven into the ground, supporting a weather-beaten sign. Red letters, faded but still clearly legible against a white background. Keep out, no trespassing, government property. Violators will be prosecuted. The hunter stared at the sign, a humorless smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Government property? In this remote section of national forest? No markings, no fences, just a single ominous sign. He'd spent nearly 2 decades exploring these woods and had never encountered this area before. Never heard any locals mention restricted government land here. Government property, he muttered under his breath, the words forming another small cloud in the cool air. Right. It was probably left over from some abandoned Forest Service project, or perhaps an old survey marker whose purpose had long been forgotten by rotating bureaucrats. The hunter had seen similar signs before, marking areas that hadn't been restricted for years, sometimes decades. The forest had a way of reclaiming what bureaucracy forgot. Almost as a reflex, a small rebellion against arbitrary authority, he stepped past the sign, crossing the invisible boundary it established. A childish impulse, perhaps, but one that satisfied some deep-seated part of him that had always chafed against pointless restrictions. The clearing was roughly circular, about 40 feet in diameter, and strangely uniform. Too uniform to be natural. The ground was covered with the same forest debris as the surrounding areas, but no saplings grew here. No underbrush fought for space, just bare ground and fallen leaves. At the center of the clearing stood what appeared to be a concrete structure, mostly reclaimed by nature. Moss covered much of it, and vines had worked their way into cracks in the weathered surface. At first glance it resembled an old hunting blind or perhaps a Forest Service storage bunker, but as the hunter approached he realized it was far more substantial, more like a small bunker or shelter. A heavy metal door, rusted at the edges but still solid, was set into one side of the concrete structure. It stood partially ajar, as though someone had left in a hurry and failed to secure it, or perhaps it had been forced open at some point. Either way, the gap was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The hunter felt his heart rate increase, a primitive response to the unknown. Hunting animals was one thing. He understood their patterns, their behaviors. But this man-made anomaly in the midst of his familiar forest triggered a different kind of alertness. He set his rifle carefully against a nearby tree and extracted a small LED flashlight from his pack. Standard equipment for early morning hunts, though he rarely needed it. Today was different. Approaching the door, he detected an odor, metallic, chemical, unnatural. It reminded him of the scent that lingered around the old mining equipment displayed at the County Historical Museum, but stronger, more acrid. He shined his flashlight through the gap, revealing a dark interior. A short corridor led to what appeared to be a larger chamber. The beam caught the glint of something metallic inside, but from this angle, he couldn't determine what it was. The hunter hesitated, years of wilderness experience screaming caution. Abandoned structures could harbor anything from rabid animals to drug operations. In his younger days, he discovered a meth lab in an old forest cabin and had the good sense to retreat immediately and alert the sheriff. But this was different. The government signage, the concrete construction, the remote location, it didn't fit the pattern of criminal activity he'd encountered before. Taking a deep breath, he squeezed through the gap, the metal door cool against his shoulder as he slipped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, the air stale and heavy with that same metallic odor, now stronger. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a corridor with walls of poured concrete, the surface discolored with age and moisture. The corridor extended about 15 feet before opening into a larger space. The hunter moved cautiously, each step deliberate, alert to any sound. But the only noise came from his own movement and breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. As he reached the end of the corridor, the space opened into a chamber roughly 20 feet square. His flashlight beam revealed what appeared to be an abandoned research facility of some kind. Metal tables, now rusted, lined one wall. Cabinets, some with doors hanging open, stood against another. The remains of what might have been electronic equipment lay scattered and decaying on various surfaces. But it was what occupied the center of the room that caused the hunter's breath to catch in his throat. A large metal tank, cylindrical in shape and approximately 8 feet tall, dominated the space. Unlike the other equipment, it showed less deterioration, its surface dull but largely intact. A series of pipes extended from its top, disappearing into the ceiling. On its side, barely visible beneath years of grime, was a symbol he recognized instantly, the 3-triangle warning sign for radioactive material. The hunter took an involuntary step backward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd worked briefly at a uranium processing facility in his 20s, before settling into his current job at the lumber mill. He knew enough about radiation to understand the potential danger. But as he played his flashlight over the tank more carefully, he noticed something else. A large crack running vertically along one side, and beneath it, a dark stain that had spread across the concrete floor. Whatever had been inside had leaked out, possibly years ago. His flashlight beam followed the stain, which extended in a rivulet toward a drain in the center of the floor. But more disturbing was what lay scattered around the base of the tank. Bones. Small animal bones, largely intact, arranged in a rough circle around the base of the cylinder. Too deliberate to be natural, too ritualistic. And then he saw it, half hidden behind one of the metal tables. A larger bone, unmistakably human. A femur, broken in the middle, but clearly not animal. The hunter's professional composure cracked. His hand trembled slightly, causing the flashlight beam to dance erratically across the chamber. Years of tracking wounded animals through difficult terrain, a field dressing game in all conditions, had desensitized him to most gruesome sights. But this was different. This was wrong. He swept the light across the room once more, forcing himself to be methodical despite his rising panic. More human bones were visible now that he knew what to look for. A partial rib cage beneath one of the tables, what appeared to be finger bones scattered near the door. And on the far wall, barely visible in the weak beam of his flashlight, something was written. Not printed or painted, but carved directly into the concrete. The letters crude but legible. They come at night. Beneath this message was a series of tally marks, hundreds of them, grouped in sets of 5. The hunter had seen enough. He backed toward the entrance, unwilling to turn his back on the chamber. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of what he had discovered. A government facility, abandoned. Radioactive material, leaked. Human remains, arranged unnaturally. And that message. Once back in the corridor, he moved more quickly, squeezing through the gap in the door, with an urgency born of rising fear. Outside, the forest air felt impossibly sweet after the stale atmosphere of the bunker. He retrieved his rifle, the familiar weight providing little comfort now. The hunter stood in the clearing, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. 20 years in these woods, and nothing had prepared him for this. He needed to document this, needed evidence before reporting it. Nobody would believe him otherwise. The hunter returned to his truck in record time, moving with purpose through the forest he knew so intimately. The morning had fully arrived now, sunlight streaming through the canopy in dusty beams, but the beauty was lost on him. His mind raced with what he had discovered, each step taking him closer to civilization, but not away from the implications of what lay in that bunker. At his vehicle, a weathered Ford F-150 that had served him reliably for over a decade, he unlocked the toolbox mounted behind the cab. Inside, alongside his hunting gear and emergency supplies, was a digital camera, not particularly advanced, but sufficient for documenting hunting trips and the occasional wildlife sighting. Today it would serve a different purpose. He also retrieved a small notebook, normally used for tracking game movements and weather conditions, and a more substantial flashlight than the pocket-sized LED he carried while hunting. After a moment's hesitation, he added a disposable face mask from the box he kept for dusty work and a pair of heavy work gloves. The hunter paused, considering whether to call someone before returning to the site. The sheriff was the obvious choice, but Sheriff Daniels was notorious for his skepticism and bureaucratic approach. Without concrete evidence, the hunter risked being dismissed as a crank, or worse, investigated for trespassing on what the sign claimed was government property. No, better to gather evidence first, then decide who to contact. The return journey seemed shorter, now that he knew where he was going. The forest's unusual silence persisted, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath around the anomalous structure. The yellow tape markers guided him back, and soon he stood once again before the Keep Out sign. This time, he photographed the sign first, making sure to capture its weathered condition and the unmarked forest surrounding it. No fence, no official markings, nothing to indicate legitimate restricted access, just a solitary warning in the middle of public forest land. The hunter donned the mask and gloves before approaching the concrete structure again. The door remained as he had left it, partially open and inviting further investigation. He documented the exterior thoroughly: the moss-covered concrete, the rusted metal door, the lack of any identifying markers or symbols that might indicate which government agency had constructed it. Steeling himself, he switched on the larger flashlight and entered once more. The corridor seemed narrower than he remembered, the air heavier. He photographed everything methodically: the discolored walls, the pattern of water damage on the ceiling, the footprints in the dust. His own from earlier, yes, but also others, older but still visible in the less trafficked areas along the walls. In the main chamber, he forced himself to be systematic, despite his unease. The central tank with its radiation symbol was documented from multiple angles, particularly the crack and the dark stain that spread from it. The hunter was careful to maintain distance, aware that without proper equipment, he had no way of knowing if radiation lingered. The bones required closer attention. He crouched near the animal remains circling the tank, noting their deliberate arrangement. Not scattered as they would be if animals had simply died here naturally, but placed with apparent purpose. He photographed them carefully, including close-ups of what appeared to be unusual marking on some of the larger bones. Not natural predator teeth marks, but something more regular, almost like notches cut with a tool. The human remains were harder to approach. The hunter had field-dressed countless deer, elk, and other game, but there was something profoundly disturbing about the scattered human bones. He forced himself to document them thoroughly, knowing they were the most critical evidence. The broken femur, the partial rib cage, the finger bones near the door, all were photographed with a careful attention to detail that belied his growing horror. Finally, he turned his attention to the far wall and the carved message. "They come at night." 5 simple words that raised countless questions. Who were they? Who had carved the message? The same person who had made the hundreds of tally marks beneath, each mark potentially representing a day, or a night, or something else entirely. As he was photographing the wall, his flashlight beam caught something he had missed during his first visit: a metal filing cabinet in the corner, partially concealed behind one of the tables. Unlike most of the other equipment, its drawer was closed. Curiosity overcame caution. Setting his camera aside but keeping the flashlight trained on the cabinet, the hunter approached and carefully pulled on the drawer. It resisted at first, then opened with a screech of metal that echoed alarmingly in the confined space. Inside was a single folder, its once official appearance now mildewed and water-stained. The hunter extracted it carefully, aware that he was potentially handling important evidence. Opening it revealed several pages of what appeared to be official documents, most too damaged by moisture to be fully legible. But the letterhead was still visible on the top page: Department of Energy, with a classification stamp that was too faded to read completely. He photographed the documents in place, then carefully returned them to the drawer, making a mental note of their existence. The Department of Energy's involvement added another layer to the mystery, one that potentially connected to the radiation warning on the tank. A sudden noise from the corridor, subtle, just a faint metallic ping, froze the hunter in place. He killed his flashlight immediately, plunging the chamber into darkness. Years of hunting had honed his senses. Something or someone was in the corridor. For 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, he remained absolutely still, controlling his breathing, listening intently. No further sounds came. After what seemed like an appropriate wait, he risked turning his flashlight back on. sweeping the beam quickly across the entrance to the chamber. Nothing. The corridor beyond remained empty as far as he could see. Perhaps it had been nothing more than the structure settling, metal contracting in the cool temperature. Or perhaps his overwrought nerves were interpreting normal sounds as threats. Either way, it was time to leave. The hunter gathered his equipment and made his way back through the corridor, moving more quickly now, eager to be back in the open air. Once outside, he took several final photographs of the structure's exterior before beginning the trek back to his vehicle. By the time he reached his truck, the sun had risen high enough to suggest late morning. The forest had begun to sound more normal, occasional bird calls, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But the hunter found no comfort in the familiar sounds. What he had discovered existed in stark contrast to the natural world he knew so well. Back at his vehicle, he secured his equipment and sat behind the wheel, considering his next move. The sheriff was still the most logical point of contact, despite his reservations about how the report would be received. He started the engine and began the drive back toward town, deciding to stop at the sheriff's office before returning home. The sheriff's department occupied a small brick building on the edge of town, its dated architecture suggesting it had been built sometime in the late 1960s. The hunter parked in the visitor's space and entered, the familiar scent of coffee and institutional cleaning products greeting him. At the front desk sat Deputy Miller, young and eager, barely 2 years into the job. She looked up as he entered, recognition dawning on her face. The hunter was well known in the community, respected for his knowledge of the surrounding wilderness. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice casual despite the urgency he felt. "Sheriff in today?" "He's on a call right now," Deputy Miller replied. "Something about trespassers at the old Wilkins property. Should be back in an hour or so. Can I help with something?" The hunter hesitated. Deputy Miller was competent enough, but this discovery required someone with authority to make decisions. "I need to report something I found in the National Forest. Something unusual." Deputy Miller's expression shifted to one of polite interest, clearly expecting a report of illegal camping or perhaps poachers. "I can take the initial report if you'd like. What kind of unusual are we talking about?" "I found what appears to be an abandoned government facility about 7 miles northeast of Cripple Creek Trail," he began, watching her reaction carefully. "Concrete bunker, radiation warnings, and what looked like human remains inside." The change was immediate. Deputy Miller's professional demeanor faltered, replaced by obvious skepticism. "Human remains? Are you sure they weren't animal bones? We get calls like that sometimes. Usually turns out to be deer or elk remains from hunters." The hunter had anticipated this reaction. "I've been hunting these woods for 20 years, Deputy. I know the difference between animal and human bones." She nodded, but the skepticism remained. "And this government facility, was there any identification? Any markings to indicate what it was used for?" "Just a keep-out sign claiming it was government property. Inside, I found documents with Department of Energy letterhead." He debated mentioning the radiation warnings, but decided against it until speaking with the sheriff directly. Deputy Miller was making notes, but her writing seemed perfunctory. "And the exact location?" The hunter gave her approximate coordinates based on his knowledge of the area. "I can take someone directly to it. I've documented everything with photographs." "Great," she said, finishing her notes. "I'll pass this along to Sheriff Daniels when he returns. He'll decide how to proceed. Can I get your contact information?" The hunter provided his details, though she already had them on file from previous interactions, mostly legitimate reports of suspicious activities he'd encountered while hunting. As he turned to leave, Deputy Miller's voice stopped him. "Just so you know, we've had a few unusual reports lately. People claiming to have seen strange lights in the woods, unusual animal behavior. Sheriff's chalking it up to that podcast series about cryptids that's been popular recently. You know how suggestible people can be." The hunter nodded non-committally, unwilling to have his discovery lumped in with campfire stories and paranormal enthusiasts. "This isn't about strange lights, Deputy. It's about concrete evidence of something that shouldn't be there." Outside, sitting in his truck again, the hunter felt frustration building. The deputy's response had confirmed his fears. Without the sheriff seeing the evidence directly, his report risked being filed away and forgotten. And even if Sheriff Daniels did follow up, there was no guarantee he'd take appropriate action. He started his truck and began the drive home, mind racing with possibilities. The town's small newspaper might be interested, but going public could create problems if this truly was government property. The Forest Service was another option, but they were chronically understaffed and slow to respond to anything that wasn't an active fire. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the hunter had made his decision. He would give the sheriff 24 hours to respond. If no action was taken by then, he would return to the site with better equipment, proper masks, gloves, perhaps even a Geiger counter if he could borrow one from his old contact at the uranium facility. That night, sleep eluded him. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the metal tank with its radiation warning, the deliberate circle of animal bones, the human remains scattered throughout the chamber, and those words carved into the concrete wall. "They come at night." Beside him, his wife slept peacefully, unaware of what he had discovered. He had told her only that he'd reported something unusual to the sheriff. No need to worry her with details until he knew more. But as he lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the forest through the partially open window, the hunter couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled upon something far more significant than an abandoned research facility. Something that the town, perhaps the entire region, needed to know about. Something that explained the strange animal behavior, the unusual silence in that section of forest. Something that had been deliberately hidden and forgotten. Until now. Morning light filtered through the county library's tall windows, casting long rectangles of brightness across worn carpet. The hunter had arrived precisely at opening time, nodding at the librarian who recognized him despite his infrequent visits. He hadn't set foot in this building for years, not since helping his daughter with a science project on local ecosystems during her high school days. The library stood as one of the oldest buildings in town, its brick exterior weathered by decades of Montana winters. Inside, despite modest renovations, the place retained the smell unique to collections of aging paper, a scent both comforting and antiquated. "Can I help you find something?" The librarian's voice carried the practiced quietness of her profession, soft yet carrying across the empty main floor. "County records," the hunter replied, keeping his voice equally low. "Specifically anything related to federal land use or government installations in the national forest, going back 50 years or so." A flicker of interest crossed the librarian's face. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. "Historical research?" "Something like that," he offered noncommittally. She led him to a back room where the county's older records were kept, a space that smelled even more intensely of aged paper and dust. Metal shelving units held cardboard boxes and bound volumes organized by decade, subject, and relevance to local governance. Most recent digitization project only went back to 1990, the librarian explained, gesturing to an ancient computer terminal in the corner. "Anything earlier, you'll need to go through these. Land records would be in those boxes." She pointed to a section labeled 1950, 1980, and those over there for 1980, 2000. Newspaper archives are bound by year in those volumes along the back wall. The hunter thanked her and she left him alone with the accumulated history of the region. For a moment he felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material. His skills lay in tracking game through wilderness, not navigating bureaucratic paper trails. But the same patience that served him while waiting in a hunting blind would serve him now. He started with land records from the 1970s, reasoning that the concrete structure's architectural style suggested that era. The boxes contained hundreds of documents, property transfers, mineral rights applications, timber harvesting permits, and occasional federal notifications about land use changes. 3 hours into his search, a folder labeled Federal Land Acquisitions and Restrictions, 1974-1977, yielded his first significant discovery, a notification to the county about a Department of Energy research installation being established in what was described only as Section 23, Northeast Quadrant. A map attached to the notification showed a small area marked in red, corresponding roughly to where he had found the bunker. The document was frustratingly vague, citing only energy research purposes as justification for the land use. But it was signed by someone with the title Assistant Director, Advanced Research Division. Under the Department of Energy's letterhead, the hunter photographed these documents with his phone, then turned his attention to the newspaper archives. He pulled volumes covering 1974 through 1978, scanning for any mentions of government activity in the forest. Most editions of the town's small newspaper focused on local events, high school sports, business openings, town council decisions. But in November 1975, a small article caught his eye. DOE establishes research station in county. The 3-paragraph piece mentioned only that scientific personnel would be conducting energy-related research, and that the facility would bring temporary employment opportunities for qualified individuals. A follow-up article from February 1976 noted that security concerns had led to restricted access around the research station, with an official statement assuring residents that all activities were routine and pose no risk to surrounding communities. Then, in August 1977, he found what he was looking for, a front-page headline reading, "Incident at Research Station Prompts Investigation." The article described an unspecified containment failure that had resulted in the facility's temporary evacuation. No casualties were reported, but the paper noted that specialized cleanup crews had been observed entering the area, and a Department of Energy spokesperson had issued a statement claiming that all materials have been properly secured and pose no threat to public safety. The most telling detail came at the article's end, a statement that the research station would be decommissioned and secured following completion of cleanup efforts, with ongoing monitoring to ensure safety. No further articles mentioned the facility. It was as though the research station had simply disappeared from public consciousness. The hunter searched for the reporter's name, T. Lowell, and found several other articles written by the same person until December 1977, after which the name vanished from the paper's bylines. A coincidence, perhaps, or simply a reporter moving on to another job. But the timing seemed suspicious. One last discovery came from a thin folder in the 1977 records, a public health notice issued by the county, warning residents against hunting or gathering plants in a vaguely defined area northeast of town due to potential environmental contamination. The notice, dated September 1977, stated that the restriction was temporary, while federal authorities completed remediation efforts. No follow-up notice lifting the restriction was ever issued, as far as he could find. Yet no current hunting maps showed any restricted zones in that area. Somehow, over the decades, the warning had been forgotten. The restricted area quietly reabsorbed into general public land. Armed with this information, the hunter left the library and drove to the county assessor's office. The modest government building housed various administrative departments, its fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors a stark contrast to the library's worn warmth. At the records desk sat a young clerk, barely out of high school by the look of him, tapping desultorily at a keyboard. "I need to see any records related to federal land designations in these sections," the hunter said, sliding over a paper where he had noted the coordinates corresponding to the mysterious bunker. The clerk glanced at the paper, then at his computer. "Most of that's national forest land, has been forever. I'm looking for any changes in designation, particularly around the mid-1970s. With obvious reluctance, the clerk began searching the digital record system. After several minutes of clicking and occasional sighing, he looked up. "Nothing shows any change of status for that area. It's all classified as national forest, open access, standard recreation and hunting permitted." "What about historical records? Anything from before the system was digitized?" The clerk's expression suggested this request represented a significant imposition. "Those would be in the basement archive. I'd have to fill out a records request. Take a few days to process." "I'll wait," the hunter said firmly. After more grumbling, the clerk disappeared through a door marked, "Archives, authorized personnel only." 20 minutes later, he returned with a dusty cardboard box. "This is all we have for those sections," he said, placing the box on the counter with evident relief at having completed the task. Inside were manila folders containing property maps from various years, most concerning routine Forest Service matters. But one folder, labeled simply Federal Designation Change, 1975, contained what he was seeking. Official documentation of a 5-acre parcel being temporarily transferred from Forest Service jurisdiction to the Department of Energy for research purposes of national importance. An attached memo, marked Confidential Internal Use Only, mentioned the construction of a containment and observation facility and included a crude diagram showing a small main building with several underground levels. Most significantly, a handwritten note at the bottom of one page read, "Connection to Rainer Creek facility to be maintained through secure line only. No surface indicators. Rainer Creek." The hunter knew the area, a remote drainage basin about 4 miles east of where he'd found the bunker. It featured a small waterfall that occasionally attracted hikers, though no established trails led there. He left the assessor's office with photographs of these documents as well, his mind already plotting a visit to Rainer Creek. If there had been a second facility, one connected somehow to the bunker he'd discovered, Perhaps it would yield additional information. The drive to Rainer Creek took nearly an hour, the last 15 minutes on an unmaintained forest road that tested his truck's suspension. He parked where the road ended and continued on foot, following the creek upstream toward the waterfall. The forest here felt normal. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the occasional rustle of larger animals moving through underbrush. None of the unnatural silence that had surrounded the bunker site. This, at least, was a relief. After 30 minutes of hiking, the hunter began scanning the slopes rising on either side of the creek, looking for anything man-made. Natural formations dominated: rock outcroppings, fallen trees, dense thickets of pine and spruce. Nothing suggested human intervention, but as he approached the waterfall, something caught his eye: a glint of metal among rocks to the left of the cascade. Climbing carefully over slippery stones, he discovered a rusted pipe, about 8 inches in diameter, emerging from the rocky slope before disappearing underground. Following the pipe's path with his eyes, the hunter noticed a depression in the hillside about 50 yards away, partially concealed by vegetation. He made his way there, pushing through thick underbrush until he reached what appeared to be a collapsed entrance to some kind of structure. Concrete fragments and twisted rebar protruded from the hillside, surrounding a dark opening barely large enough for a person to crawl through. The entrance had clearly suffered structural failure years ago, the surrounding earth gradually reclaiming the man-made intrusion. The hunter photographed this discovery, then extracted his flashlight and peered into the opening. The beam illuminated a debris-filled passage that extended perhaps 20 feet before a more significant collapse blocked further progress. Even from this limited vantage point, he could see that this had once been a substantial installation. The visible walls were poured concrete, similar to the bunker he'd found earlier. Along one partially exposed wall ran electrical conduits and what might have been communication lines, all severed and degraded by time and exposure. He considered attempting to enter but decided against it. The structural instability was obvious, and without proper equipment, exploration would be foolhardy. Instead, he documented what he could from the outside, noting particularly a small metal plate affixed near the collapsed entrance. Though corroded, the plate still bore a partially legible identification: RC2 access point, authorized personnel only. RC2, Rainer Creek 2, presumably, which suggested there might have been other access points, RC1, perhaps others, connected to whatever facility had once existed here. As the hunter prepared to leave, a final discovery cemented the connection to the bunker he'd found earlier. Half buried in the soil near the collapsed entrance lay a small metal sign, its red lettering faded but recognizable, identical to the keep-out warning he had ignored the previous day. Dawn was just breaking when the hunter returned to the bunker site the next day. He had come prepared this time: proper respirator mask, heavy-duty gloves, a more powerful flashlight, and a handheld GPS unit to record precise coordinates. He had also brought a small digital video camera to document his exploration more thoroughly. The forest seemed even quieter than before, if that were possible. No bird calls, no rustling underbrush, just the sound of his own breathing and footsteps as he followed his previous path to the clearing with its solitary warning sign. The bunker door remained as he had left it, partially ajar. Before entering, the hunter carefully recorded the exterior and surrounding area with his video camera, narrating what he knew so far about the facility's history and connection to the Rainer Creek site. Department of Energy Research Installation, established 1975, some kind of incident in 1977 leading to containment failure, he summarized, speaking clearly for the camera's microphone. Connected to another facility at Rainer Creek, now collapsed. Both abandoned but never properly decommissioned according to county records. Donning his respirator and gloves, he squeezed through the door and entered the corridor once more. This time he moved with greater confidence, his improved lighting revealing details he had missed during previous visits. The corridor walls bore faded markings, arrows and labels indicating directions. One pointed forward with the label, Main Observation, while another pointed to a side passage he hadn't noticed before, labeled Communications. The hunter followed this new passage, which curved to the right before ending at another metal door. This one completely closed. Unlike the exterior door, this one featured an electronic keypad, long since dead. After several attempts to pull the door open, failed, the hunter examined the frame more carefully and discovered a manual override, a small panel that, when removed, revealed an emergency release handle. He pulled it, and with a grinding protest of long immobilized metal, the door swung partially open. Behind lay a room about 15 feet square, dominated by what had once been electronic equipment, control panels, monitoring stations, and what appeared to be communications gear, all now dark and silent. Dust covered everything, undisturbed for decades except for small animal droppings here and there. Of particular interest was a large desk with built-in drawers. Most were empty, but one contained what appeared to be a logbook, its pages yellowed and stiff with age. The hunter carefully photographed each page, revealing entries from June 1975 through July 1977. The entries were maddeningly cryptic, full of code numbers and technical jargon. But certain phrases stood out. Sample 37B shows increased activity under UV exposure. Containment field stable at 87% capacity. Night observations continue to yield anomalous readings. Subject 12 exhibited unexpected cellular changes after 72-hour exposure. The final entries became increasingly concerning. Containment field fluctuating between 62–78%. Request immediate technical support. Multiple sample degradations observed. Recommend evacuation protocol if field drops below 60%. Urgent. Containment breach in main chamber. Emergency protocols enacted. Awaiting Class A response team. The last entry, dated August 3, 1977, simply read, "Facility locked down pending decontamination. All personnel relocated to secure facility. Monitoring to continue remotely." Returning to the main corridor, the hunter proceeded to the chamber he had explored previously, with its central tank and scattered remains. With better lighting, he now noticed a metal hatch in the floor near the tank, its circular outline barely visible beneath years of dust and grime. Using a pocket knife, he scraped around the hatch's edge until finding a recessed handle. The hatch resisted his first attempts to lift it, then suddenly gave way with a sound of breaking seals. Stale air wafted up from below, carrying that same metallic odor he had noticed before, but stronger now. A narrow metal ladder descended into darkness. The hunter played his flashlight down, revealing a lower level about 15 feet below. After securing the hatch in the open position with a piece of debris, he carefully descended the ladder, testing each rung before trusting it with his weight. The lower level was a single large room, approximately 30 feet square, with a much lower ceiling than the upper chamber. Unlike the relatively intact upper level, this area showed signs of more significant damage. Sections of ceiling had collapsed, exposing pipes and electrical conduits. Water damage was evident along one wall, where minerals had leached through concrete, creating eerie, stalactite-like formations. Most disturbing were the 6 metal tables arranged in the center of the room, each equipped with restraints. These weren't medical examination tables. The restraints were too robust, designed to secure something that might struggle violently. Adjacent to each table stood what appeared to be monitoring equipment, now dark and silent. Along one wall ran a series of what looked like holding cells, small chambers with reinforced glass fronts, now cracked and clouded with age. Inside several cells, the hunter could make out claw marks scored into concrete walls, deep grooves that no human fingernails could have created. On the opposite wall hung a large map of the region, protected under cracked plastic. Red circles marked various locations throughout the forest, with lines connecting them to the central point that presumably represented this facility. One such line extended to where the Rainer Creek installation would be located. Each marked location had a designation, Collection Point A through Collection Point M, and a series of dates. The hunter photographed the map carefully, making sure each marking was clearly visible. In the corner, farthest from the ladder, stood several large metal cabinets. Most were empty, but one contained sealed specimen containers, about the size of coffee cans, arranged in rows. Each bore a label with a code number and date. The dates ranged from June 1975 to July 1977, corresponding to the facility's operational period according to the records he had found. Most containers were empty or contained only dried residue, but 3 still held what appeared to be preserved tissue samples, organic material suspended in cloudy liquid. The hunter photographed these but was careful not to touch the containers. A final chilling discovery came when he examined an overturned desk in another corner. Beneath it lay a tape recorder, an old model that used cassettes. Beside it were several tapes in plastic cases, each labeled with dates and the word observations. The hunter pocketed these tapes, hoping they might still be playable. As he prepared to return to the upper level, his flashlight beam caught something else. Fresh boot prints in the dust, different from his own. Someone else had been here, and recently. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He quickly climbed the ladder back to the upper chamber, suddenly aware of his vulnerability. The boot prints didn't match his own pattern, and he had been the only one to report finding this place to the authorities, unless Sheriff Daniels had secretly investigated without informing him. A more troubling possibility arose. What if the facility wasn't as abandoned as it appeared? What if someone was still monitoring it, perhaps from the Rainer Creek installation or somewhere else? The hunter made his way back to the entrance, moving more quickly now, eager to return to daylight and open air. As he emerged from the bunker, he immediately sensed something wrong. The forest remained unnaturally silent, but now the silence felt watchful, hostile. Scanning the clearing and surrounding trees revealed nothing obvious, but years of hunting had honed his awareness of being watched. Something or someone was observing him. He could feel it. The hunter's truck appeared undisturbed when he returned to it, parked at the end of an old logging road about a mile from the bunker. He stowed his equipment in the toolbox, then performed a quick check of the vehicle. Underneath, around the engine, inside the cab, everything seemed normal. It wasn't until he started the engine that he noticed something on the passenger seat, a folded piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there when he arrived. With a sense of foreboding, he picked it up and unfolded it. The message was typed in plain black text on white paper. Curiosity has consequences. Walk away. No signature, no identifying marks. Just 7 words that confirmed his suspicions. Someone knew he had found the bunker. Someone who didn't want its secrets exposed. The hunter's first instinct was to drive directly to the sheriff's office. Despite his earlier frustration with their response, this was now concrete evidence that something suspicious was happening. Anonymous threats weren't something even Sheriff Daniels could dismiss. The same brick building greeted him, but this time Sheriff Daniels was present. A barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and the weathered complexion of someone who spent significant time outdoors. "Heard you made quite a report to Deputy Miller yesterday," the sheriff said, leaning back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Found some kind of secret government bunker," she said. The hunter placed his evidence on the desk. Printed photographs of the bunker's interior and exterior. The maps from the county archives showing the Department of Energy land designation, and the threatening note left in his truck. "This was waiting for me when I returned to my vehicle today," he said, pointing to the note. "Someone's monitoring that site, Sheriff, and they don't want me or anyone looking into it." Sheriff Daniels examined the photographs with a neutral expression, then picked up the note. "Could be kids," he said finally. "Could be someone messing with you after hearing about your report. Word travels fast in town. Kids wouldn't know I was at that specific location," the hunter countered. "And look at the boot prints I photographed inside the lower level. Those aren't mine, and they're recent." The sheriff sighed, removing his reading glasses. "Look, I've been sheriff in this county for 17 years. Before that, I was with the Forest Service for a decade. I know every inch of those woods, and there's no secret government bunker with radiation leaks and human remains. The evidence is right in front of you," the hunter insisted, tapping the photographs. "I can take you there right now. What I see are photos of what could be any old structure, some bones that could be from anything, and a lot of speculation." The sheriff's tone remained professional but had hardened. As for county records showing Department of Energy presence back in the 70s, sure, they had research stations all over during that period. Cold War stuff. Most were abandoned decades ago. And the threat? The fresh boot prints? Sheriff Daniels slid the note back across the desk. "File a formal complaint about the threatening note if you want, but I'd advise you to let this go. There are sections of forest with old hazards, abandoned mines, collapsed cave systems, erosion risks. That's probably why there was a warning sign. The Forest Service puts those up to keep people out of dangerous areas." The hunter stared at the sheriff, a sinking feeling in his stomach. Either Daniels was being deliberately obtuse, or something more concerning was happening. "Are you saying you won't investigate this at all?" "I'm saying there's nothing that warrants a full investigation." The sheriff stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. "I'll have someone from the department drive out that way during regular patrols, check for signs of trespassers or illegal activity. Standard procedure." As the hunter gathered his evidence, the sheriff added almost casually, "By the way, hunting season opens officially next week. Your license is current, right?" Be a shame if you were found in those woods without proper documentation. The implied threat wasn't subtle. The hunter nodded stiffly and left, frustration and suspicion mounting. Sheriff Daniels hadn't just dismissed his concerns. He had issued what amounted to a warning to stay out of the forest. Outside, as the hunter walked toward his truck, a voice called softly from between two parked patrol cars. "Psst, over here." He turned to see a young man in the tan uniform of the sheriff's department, one of the junior deputies he recognized but couldn't immediately name. "Not here," the deputy whispered, glancing nervously toward the building. "Meet me at Carlson's Diner in 20 minutes, corner booth." Before the hunter could respond, the deputy had slipped back inside the building. Carlson's Diner sat on the town's main street, a fixture since the 1960s with its chrome-trimmed facade and neon sign. At mid-afternoon it was nearly empty, a couple of retirees nursing coffee at the counter, a family with young children in a booth near the front. The hunter took the corner booth farthest from the entrance, positioning himself to watch the door. 15 minutes later, the young deputy entered, now in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt. He ordered coffee at the counter before making his way to the booth, sliding in across from the hunter. "Deputy Ramirez," he said quietly, introducing himself. "I overheard your conversation with the sheriff. I wasn't supposed to, but the ventilation in that building carries sound between offices." The hunter nodded, waiting. "You're not the first person to find that bunker," Ramirez continued, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, a geology graduate student doing field research stumbled across it. She reported it too. Sheriff Daniels gave her the same response he gave you. What happened to her? Ramirez glanced around before answering. She kept pushing, trying to get Forest Service involved. Then one night, her research cabin caught fire. She got out, but all her samples, equipment, notes, everything was destroyed. The official report called it an electrical fault. She left town the next day. The hunter absorbed this information. "You think the sheriff is involved in covering this up?" "I don't know," Ramirez admitted. "But 2 months ago, I was processing some routine paperwork and saw something I probably wasn't supposed to see. A regular payment from a company called Northeastern Resource Management to the department's discretionary fund. Substantial amount, categorized as environmental consultation fee. Never heard of that company. Neither had I. So I looked them up. Very little information available, but their corporate filing lists them as a subsidiary of another company, which is itself owned by a major defense contractor." Ramirez took a sip of his coffee. "The address listed for their local office? It's a post office box registered to a law firm in the state capital." The implications were disturbing. If a private company with defense connections was paying the sheriff's department, and the sheriff was actively discouraging investigation of the bunker. "Be careful," Ramirez said, standing to leave. "I've said more than I should already. But whatever's going on with that place in the woods, it's not just an abandoned research station. Too many people want it left alone." That evening, the hunter sat at his kitchen table, organizing his evidence. His wife had taken their daughter's old room upstairs to watch television, giving him space to work. He had been vague about what he was doing, mentioning only some concerning findings in the forest that he was documenting. He had just finished transferring photos from his camera to his laptop when his cell phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Your deputy friend should be more careful. So should your family." The hunter froze, staring at the screen. Whoever was watching him knew about his meeting with Ramirez. Worse, they were now bringing his family into their threats. A cold fury replaced his initial shock. He had been careful his entire life, a responsible hunter, a dedicated worker, a man who respected rules and authorities. But this crossed a line. Threatening his family transformed this from an investigation into something personal. He created 3 sets of all evidence. Digital copies stored on his laptop, on a USB drive, and printed copies in a folder. Then he composed a detailed document explaining everything he had discovered and the connections he had made. His writing wasn't elegant, but it was thorough and clear. When the landline rang shortly after 9 p.m., he was already anticipating another threat. Instead, the voice that came through was one he recognized, the state newspaper's investigative reporter who had covered the lumber mill accident years ago. "I got a strange anonymous tip to call you," the reporter said. "Something about a government cover-up in your area. Normally I'd ignore anonymous tips, but it came with specific details that checked out, including your name and number." The hunter considered his response carefully. "I found something in the forest that shouldn't be there. Something dangerous that local authorities are ignoring. I have evidence, documentation, and now I have threats against my family. I can be there tomorrow morning." The reporter replied, professional interest clearly piqued. 8 a.m.? "Make it 7, the hunter said, "and don't tell anyone where you're going." After hanging up, he went to the window and looked out at the darkened forest visible beyond their property line. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, threatening, working to keep decades-old secrets buried. But they had made a critical mistake by threatening his family. Whatever was hidden in that bunker, whatever had leaked from that tank, whatever experiments had been conducted in those underground chambers, it would remain hidden no longer. The hunter switched off the kitchen light and moved through the darkness of his home with practiced ease. Tomorrow would bring either answers or more danger, probably both. He needed to be ready. As he checked that doors and windows were secure, a memory surfaced. Those words carved into the concrete wall of the bunker. "They come at night." The hunter reached into the closet near the front door and removed his shotgun from its locked case. Whoever or whatever came for him and his family tonight would find him waiting, alert, and armed. Some secrets deserved to remain buried, but others, secrets that threatened the safety of an entire community, secrets protected through intimidation and possible corruption, those needed to be exposed, whatever the cost. Morning arrived without incident, though the hunter hadn't truly slept. He'd spent the night alternating between vigilant watch at different windows, shotgun within reach, and carefully organizing his evidence. The forest surrounding his property had remained silent. No unexpected movement, no strange lights, no indication of the watchers who had threatened him, but their absence did little to ease his tension. Dawn brought a pale, misty light filtering through the pines. The hunter moved quietly through his home, letting his wife sleep. In the kitchen, he prepared a thermos of coffee and laid out the folders containing his printed evidence. His digital backup, 3 identical USB drives, sat beside them, each in a labeled envelope. At exactly 7, a silver sedan pulled into his driveway. The reporter, punctual as expected. The hunter recognized him immediately from the newspaper byline photos, mid-40s with prematurely gray hair and wireframe glasses. He had a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. His coverage of the lumber mill accident years ago had been fair and comprehensive, resulting in improved safety protocols that had likely saved lives. The hunter met him on the porch, gesturing for quiet as they shook hands. He led the reporter to the detached garage rather than the house, closing the door behind them. "I appreciate your discretion," the hunter began, indicating a workbench where he'd laid out his documentation. "Everything I've found is here. Photographs, county records, facility diagrams, audio recordings, and a detailed timeline of my investigation." The reporter scanned the materials with professional interest. "This is substantial. You mentioned threats?" The hunter showed him the notes and text message. "Whoever's watching that facility knows I've been investigating. They know about my meeting with Deputy Ramirez, and they've threatened my family." For the next 45 minutes, the hunter walked the reporter through his discoveries: the abandoned bunker, the radiation warnings, the apparent human experimentation, the connection to the Rainer Creek facility, and the sheriff's suspicious lack of interest in investigating. "I need to see this place myself," the reporter said finally. "These photographs are compelling, but I need to document it firsthand before going to press." The hunter had anticipated this request. "I'm going back one final time this morning. You're welcome to join me, but I should warn you, it's not just abandoned. Someone is actively monitoring it. They knew when I was there, they knew about my meeting with Ramirez, and they may be connected to whatever is still happening at that site." The reporter nodded gravely. "I've worked in conflict zones before. I understand the risks. There's something else you should know," the hunter added. "Last night I made some preparations." He opened a metal cabinet and removed a sealed envelope. "This contains everything I've discovered, plus a video statement I recorded detailing the threats and my concerns about local law enforcement involvement. I've arranged for it to be delivered to the State Attorney General's office, the regional FBI field office, and 3 different news outlets if I don't return and cancel the delivery by 6 p.m. tonight." The reporter raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Smart precaution." "I also contacted my brother-in-law, a state trooper based in the capital. He doesn't know details, just that I've discovered something concerning in the forest that local authorities are ignoring, and that I've received threats. If he doesn't hear from me by noon, he'll alert his superiors." The hunter checked his watch. "We should move soon. The facility is about an hour's drive, then another 40 minutes hiking. I want to be in and out before noon." While the reporter reviewed the documentation, The hunter gathered his equipment: high-powered flashlight, digital camera with extra memory cards, video camera, GPS unit, sample containers, respirator mask, heavy gloves, and a small backpack containing water, energy bars, and basic first aid supplies. His hunting knife went into its usual sheath on his belt. After a moment's hesitation, he added his revolver, a .357 Magnum he typically carried only during backcountry expeditions where bear encounters were possible. Today's threat wasn't bears, but it felt equally dangerous. "One more thing," the hunter said, opening a drawer in his workbench and removing a small electronic device. "Trail camera with motion activation. Records to internal memory and streams to my phone if there's service. I'll place it near the entrance to monitor if anyone follows us in." The hunter left a note for his wife explaining he was guiding the reporter on a story about forest conservation, close enough to the truth to be believable, vague enough to protect her. He added that he'd be back by early afternoon and would call at lunch. As they prepared to leave, the hunter paused at his truck, scanning the tree line and the road leading to his property. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of being watched had become a constant companion since his discovery. "We'll take my truck to the forest access road," he told the reporter. "Then proceed on foot. Stay close, move quietly, and do exactly as I say if there's trouble." The reporter nodded, his expression revealing both apprehension and professional excitement. This was clearly a bigger story than he had anticipated. The hunter started the engine, checking the mirrors constantly as they pulled away from his property. The road ahead led into the heart of the national forest and back to the bunker that had transformed his life from one of predictable routine into a dangerous quest for truth. They left the truck at the end of an old logging road, the hunter carefully securing the trail camera to a tree with a clear view of their vehicle. The forest appeared normal this morning. Birds called from the canopy. A squirrel chattered indignantly at their intrusion, and sunlight filtered through the pines in dusty golden beams. Yet the hunter remained alert, scanning constantly for signs of surveillance or pursuit. "Stay close," he instructed the reporter, "and keep your phone in airplane mode. If anyone is monitoring electronics in the area, an active signal could give us away." They moved through the forest with practiced silence, the hunter leading them along game trails and natural passages that minimized their visibility. The reporter, despite being a city dweller, matched his pace well, stopping when signaled and moving only when the hunter indicated it was safe. After 30 minutes of hiking, the hunter paused, pointing to a yellow plastic marker on a distant tree. "That's the first trail marker I found. From here on, be especially vigilant. We're entering the area that was originally restricted." The markers led them to the familiar clearing with its weathered "Keep Out" sign. The reporter photographed it extensively, then followed the hunter to the concrete structure with its partially open metal door. "Jesus," the reporter whispered, staring at the bunker. "This is exactly as you described it. Department of Energy Research Facility, abandoned after some kind of containment failure. What I've shown you so far is just the surface," the hunter replied, donning his respirator and gloves. "The real evidence is inside. Put these on." He handed the reporter a second respirator and pair of gloves, then attached a small light to his cap. "Follow me, stay close, and document everything. If something happens to me, get out immediately and activate that evidence release I prepared." The interior of the bunker appeared unchanged. The same dark corridor leading to the main chamber with its central tank, radiation warnings, and disturbing arrangement of bones. The reporter moved methodically around the space, photographing and recording video of every significant detail, his professional demeanor occasionally broken by muttered expletives. "The lower level is where I found the most disturbing evidence," the hunter said, leading the way to the floor hatch he had discovered during his previous visit. The ladder creaked under their weight as they descended to the underground chamber with its restraint tables monitoring equipment and holding cells. In the improved light of their combined flashlights and headlamps, the horror of what had occurred here became even more evident. The deep claw marks in the cell walls, the restraints designed for something that would struggle violently, the specimen containers with their preserved contents. "This is unbelievable," the reporter said, his voice slightly muffled by the respirator. "Human experimentation? Containment of test subjects? What exactly were they studying here?" "I'm not certain," the hunter admitted, "but based on the logbook entries and the radiation warnings, they were exposing subjects, human and animal, to something that caused cellular changes according to their notes." The reporter approached one of the specimen containers. These need to be analyzed by experts. Whatever they were doing here, a sudden noise from above interrupted him, metal scraping against concrete, then a thud. Both men froze, staring at the ceiling. Someone's in the upper chamber, the hunter whispered, killing his flashlight. The reporter followed suit, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint glow from the hatch above. Heavy footsteps moved across the upper level. Not one person, but several, moving with purpose rather than caution. The hunter motioned the reporter toward the back of the room, away from the ladder and into the shadows behind the specimen cabinets. A beam of light shot down through the open hatch, sweeping across the lower chamber. A voice called down, male, authoritative. "This is a restricted area. Identify yourselves immediately." The hunter remained silent, guiding the reporter further into the shadows. From their new position, they could see 3 beams of light now penetrating the darkness from above, moving in coordinated patterns. "We know you're down there," the voice continued. "We detected your vehicle and have been tracking your movement. Come up now, and we can resolve this civilly." The hunter's mind raced. These weren't local sheriff's deputies. The professional tone, the admission of surveillance capabilities, all suggested something more sophisticated. Private security, perhaps, or actual government personnel monitoring the supposedly abandoned facility. The sound of boots on the metal ladder confirmed his fears. They were coming down. The hunter leaned close to the reporter's ear. When they reached the bottom, move toward the far corner. "There's a utility access tunnel behind the last holding cell. I noticed it during my previous exploration but didn't investigate. It might be our only way out." The reporter nodded, clutching his camera bag protectively. The first figure reached the bottom of the ladder, a man in tactical gear, face obscured by a mask similar to their respirators but more advanced. He carried what appeared to be a military-grade rifle with a mounted light. "Last chance to come out peacefully," the man called, sweeping his weapon in a practiced arc. 2 more similarly equipped figures descended behind him. The hunter waited until all 3 were moving toward the center of the room, then signaled the reporter. They crept along the wall, staying in the shadows, moving toward the utility access panel the hunter had identified. It was a narrow opening, perhaps 3 feet square, secured with a simple latch rather than a lock. The hunter eased it open, revealing a dark maintenance tunnel beyond. He gestured for the reporter to enter first, then followed, pulling the panel closed behind them, just as a light beam swept over their previous position. The tunnel was cramped, barely tall enough to crouch in, with pipes and conduits running along its length. It smelled of mold and stagnant water, but the air moved slightly, suggesting it led somewhere with outside access. They crawled forward as quickly as possible, the hunter constantly glancing back for signs of pursuit. Behind them, muffled shouts indicated their absence had been discovered. After approximately 50 yards, the tunnel forked. The hunter paused, feeling the air currents, then pointed left. "That way has fresher air." They had traveled perhaps another 100 yards when a distant metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. Their pursuers had found the access panel and were following. "Move faster," the hunter urged, though in the confined space true speed was impossible. His joints protested the awkward crawling position, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The tunnel began to slope upward, and the quality of the air improved noticeably. Ahead, a faint grayish light suggested an exit. As they approached, they could see it was another access panel, this one with thin beams of daylight visible around its edges. The hunter reached it first, fumbling with the latch mechanism, which had partially rusted over the decades. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Radio chatter, equipment clanking against the tunnel walls. With a final effort, the latch gave way. The hunter pushed the panel open and emerged into daylight, finding himself in a shallow drainage ditch overgrown with vegetation. He helped pull the reporter out, then quickly surveyed their surroundings to get his bearings. They were approximately a quarter-mile east of the bunker, in a section of forest he knew reasonably well. The reporter looked pale but determined, clutching his camera bag like a lifeline. "They'll be out any second," the hunter said, already moving. "We need to reach higher ground, then circle back toward the truck." They ran through the forest, no longer concerned with moving silently. Speed was their only advantage now. The hunter led them up a steep incline, using trees and rocks for handholds. His familiarity with the terrain proved invaluable. He knew which slopes were navigable, which areas provided cover, which direction would eventually lead them back to the logging road. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees. Their pursuers had emerged from the tunnel and were organizing a search pattern. The hunter caught glimpses of them through the foliage, at least 5 figures in dark tactical gear, moving with military precision. "Down," he whispered suddenly, pulling the reporter behind a fallen tree. 30 yards away, another armed figure moved perpendicular to their path, sweeping the area with a weapon that looked decidedly more advanced than standard hunting rifles. They waited, breathing silently, until the figure passed, then continued their escape, moving from cover to cover, using natural features to mask their movement. The hunter's decades of stalking game through these woods had prepared him perfectly for being the hunted rather than the hunter. A creek crossing provided temporary relief. They waded through the knee-deep water for several hundred yards, leaving no tracks before emerging onto a rocky bank that would hold no footprints. The hunter oriented himself using the sun and familiar landmarks, adjusting their course toward the logging road where they had left the truck. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, suggesting their creek strategy had worked. Still, they maintained their pace, stopping only briefly to catch their breath and check that the reporter's camera equipment, their evidence, remained intact. "Who are they?" the reporter gasped during one such pause. "Private security, maybe," the hunter replied, "or some black ops government unit tasked with maintaining containment of whatever they were experimenting with. Either way, they're well equipped and know these woods better than I expected." They pushed on, the terrain growing more familiar as they approached the logging road. The hunter's truck came into view through the trees, apparently undisturbed. The trail camera he had mounted still blinked its operational status. "Wait," he whispered, pulling the reporter down. "Too easy." From their concealed position, he studied the area surrounding his vehicle. Nothing seemed overtly suspicious, but years of hunting had taught him to trust his instincts. Something didn't feel right. He extracted his phone, now a safe distance from the bunker, and checked the trail camera feed. The screen showed his truck, just as they were seeing it now. But as he watched, a shadow moved briefly across the frame. Someone positioned on the far side of the vehicle, waiting. "They're watching the truck," he whispered. "At least one, probably more." The reporter looked stricken. "How do we get out of here?" The hunter considered their options. "There's an old fire road about a mile south that connects to the main forest access road. From there, it's about 3 miles to the highway. We can call for help once we reach cell coverage." They circled wide around the truck, moving with extreme caution. The hunter retrieved the memory card from his trail camera as they passed, unwilling to leave any evidence behind. Once clear of the immediate area, they increased their pace, following game trails toward the old fire road. The relative safety of the public highway came into view nearly 2 hours later. Both men were exhausted, clothes torn and muddied from their cross-country escape, but they had survived, and more importantly, they had preserved their evidence. The roadside diner 40 miles outside of town provided the perfect neutral meeting place, public enough for safety, remote enough for privacy. The hunter and reporter sat in a corner booth, their evidence spread across the table between cups of strong coffee. They had driven here in the reporter's car after being picked up by a colleague he had called as backup. Across from them sat the federal agent, a woman in her late 40s with short-cropped hair and an expression that revealed nothing. She had arrived precisely on time, alone as requested, identifying herself with credentials that the reporter had carefully verified. "This falls under multiple federal jurisdictions," she said after reviewing their evidence for nearly 30 minutes. "Environmental Protection Agency for the contamination aspects, Department of Energy for the facility itself, FBI for the human rights violations and apparent cover-up involving local law enforcement." She lifted one of the specimen containers they had managed to retrieve, studying its contents with clinical detachment. "And depending on what analysis reveals about these samples, possibly CDC and DARPA as well." The hunter watched her carefully, still wary after their narrow escape. "Can you guarantee this won't be buried again? These people have resources, connections. They tried to silence me, threatened my family." The agent's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concern, but this," she gestured at the extensive documentation, "is too significant to disappear. You've created too many copies, involved too many agencies. The state attorney general already has a team assembling based on your initial evidence package." She continued, "I've dispatched a hazardous materials team to secure the site, backed by federal agents. They should be containing the area as we speak." The reporter, who had been making notes, looked up. "When can I break this story?" 24 hours, the agent replied. "We need time to secure the site and begin proper evidence collection. After that, the public has a right to know. True to her word, the story broke exactly 24 hours later, not just in the state newspaper, but across every major news network in the country. The reporter's comprehensive coverage, backed by the hunter's meticulous documentation, created an immediate sensation. Cold War secret exposed, illegal human experimentation facility discovered in Montana forest, radiation contamination cover-up, decades-old government project threatens rural community. Hunter's discovery reveals horrifying human rights violations in abandoned Doe facility. The hunter watched the coverage from the safety of a hotel room in the state capital, where federal marshals had relocated his family as a precaution. His wife sat beside him, still processing the magnitude of what he had uncovered and the danger he had faced. Television footage showed the forest now swarming with activity. Hazmat teams in full protective gear, FBI evidence response units, and armed federal agents securing a wide perimeter around the bunker. Reporters clustered at the edge of the exclusion zone, broadcasting live updates as details continued to emerge. The sheriff's department had been placed under investigation, with Sheriff Daniels and several deputies taken into custody for questioning about their role in the decades-long cover-up. Financial records had revealed substantial payments from shell companies ultimately linked to defense contractors with classified government contracts. Most satisfying to the hunter was the announcement that comprehensive environmental testing would be conducted throughout the region, with health screenings offered to all residents who might have been exposed to contamination from the leaking facility. The truth he had risked everything to expose would potentially save countless lives. "You did the right thing," his wife said quietly, taking his hand. She had been angry at first, frightened by the danger and the upheaval to their lives. But, seeing the scope of what he had uncovered, she understood the necessity of his actions. 3 days later, standing on a hilltop overlooking the forest he had hunted for decades, the hunter watched as a convoy of specialized vehicles made its way along the main access road toward the now infamous bunker site. According to the reporter's updates, they were bringing equipment to begin a comprehensive decontamination operation that would take months, possibly years to complete. The forest would recover eventually. Nature always did, but the hunter knew his relationship with these woods had changed forever. What had once been a sanctuary, a place of peace and connection to the natural world, would now always carry the shadow of what humanity had hidden there. Still, as the autumn sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the vast expanse of wilderness stretching to the horizon, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had honored the most fundamental responsibility of a hunter, not just to take from the land, but to protect it, to ensure its health for future generations. Some secrets deserved to remain buried, but others needed to be exposed to the light, no matter the personal cost. The hunter shouldered his pack and began the hike back to the main road where his family waited. There would be more statements to give, more evidence to provide, more processes to complete. But for now, he had done what needed to be done. The truth, like the hunter himself, had found its way out of the darkness. 6 months had passed since the hunter's discovery had exploded into national headlines. Winter had come and gone, burying the forest under heavy Montana snow before reluctantly yielding to spring's persistent warmth. Now, as summer approached, the transformation of both the land and the community continued unabated. The hunter stood at his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching a convoy of government vehicles make their way along the main road toward what locals now simply called the site. The procession had become routine. Environmental teams, forensic specialists, security personnel, all part of what had evolved into one of the most extensive federal operations in the state's history. On the kitchen table lay the morning newspaper, its front-page headline marking a significant milestone. Investigation reveals full scope of forest facility horrors. The article detailed the latest findings from the Congressional Oversight Committee that had been established to investigate what was now officially termed the Montana Incident. The scale of the operation had far exceeded even the hunter's darkest suspicions. What he had stumbled upon was merely the outermost layer of a much larger complex. Ground-penetrating radar and extensive excavation had revealed 3 additional subterranean levels beneath the bunker he had explored. Levels containing specialized laboratories, extensive holding facilities, and equipment that one whistleblower described as decades ahead of publicly acknowledged technology. The official count now stood at 37 confirmed victims, individuals whose remains had been recovered from both the main facility and several satellite locations throughout the forest. DNA analysis had linked 17 of these victims to missing persons cases dating back to the 1970s, while the others remained unidentified. Forensic anthropologists were still working to determine the exact nature of the experiments performed, though radiation exposure appeared consistent across all remains. The investigation had expanded well beyond the local sheriff's department. 3 former Department of Energy officials had been indicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to human rights violations. 2 executives from the defense contractor identified as funding the ongoing security operation were facing congressional hearings. Most satisfying to the hunter was the news that Sheriff Daniels and 4 of his deputies had been charged with obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The corrupt system that had protected the facility for decades was finally crumbling. Perhaps most disturbing were the revelations about the facility's purpose. According to declassified documents and testimony from surviving project scientists, the research had focused on radiation's effects on human cellular structure, specifically attempts to induce controlled mutations that could enhance human capabilities. The project, codenamed Evolution Catalyst, had been officially terminated in 1977 following the containment breach, but evidence suggested that aspects of the research had continued covertly for decades afterward. The hunter's wife entered the kitchen, placing a hand on his shoulder. "More news?" He nodded, taking her hand. Their lives had changed immeasurably since his discovery. The initial weeks of protective custody had given way to a cautious return to normalcy, though federal agents still conducted regular security checks on their property. Their daughter had taken a leave of absence from college to be with them during the most intense period of media attention, returning to her studies only after the immediate furor had subsided. "They've identified 3 more victims," he said quietly. "College students who went missing while hiking in 1976. Their families finally have answers." His wife squeezed his shoulder gently. "You gave them that. Never forget it." The hunter nodded, though the weight of the discovery still pressed heavily on him. He had never sought to become a central figure in what the national media had dubbed the most significant government scandal since Watergate. His intention had simply been to report something dangerous, to protect his community. Instead, he had uncovered a horror that extended far beyond their small town. The impact radiated outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Locally, the community had undergone a profound transformation. Initial disbelief had given way to shock, then anger, as residents learned that for decades, many had been potentially exposed to radiation and other contaminants. The comprehensive health screening program established by the CDC had identified elevated cancer rates and unusual immunological markers in residents within a 10-mile radius of the facility, findings that had prompted a class action lawsuit against the federal government. Nationally, the scandal had triggered a sweeping review of classified Cold War-era research programs. Congressional hearings featured testimony from whistleblowers describing similar facilities in other remote locations. The president had established an independent commission to investigate human rights violations committed under the guise of national security, promising full transparency and accountability. Internationally, the revelations had prompted diplomatic tensions as several allied nations demanded information about whether similar research had been conducted within their borders. United Nations human rights observers had visited the site, their subsequent report condemning the violations in the strongest possible terms. The hunter finished his coffee and picked up the newspaper again. A smaller article on page 3 caught his attention. Cleanup and containment operations expected to continue for decades. The environmental impact would long outlast the initial scandal. Specialized teams had established a permanent containment zone around the facility, with ongoing monitoring of soil, water, and wildlife for signs of contamination. His phone buzzed with a text message from the reporter who had won the Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the scandal. "Special report airing tonight. They're finally addressing the satellite facilities. You might want to watch." The hunter set down his phone, glancing again at the convoy of vehicles visible through his window. The truth had emerged. Justice was proceeding, and the long process of healing had begun. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that even now, with all the resources and attention focused on the site, something remained hidden, something that might never fully come to light. The state capitol building's grand steps were crowded with people despite the light summer rain. Media crews had set up equipment under hastily erected canopies, their cameras trained on the podium, where various officials gathered beneath the shelter of the ornate entrance. The hunter stood to one side, uncomfortable in his dress clothes, his wife and daughter flanking him supportively. The governor approached the microphone, her expression solemn beneath silver-streaked hair. Today, we gather to recognize extraordinary courage and citizenship in the face of powerful forces that sought to conceal the truth. The ceremony had been organized to present the state's highest civilian honor to those who had exposed what was now officially termed the Montana Incident. The hunter had initially refused the recognition, uncomfortable with being celebrated for what he viewed as simply doing what was right. Only the insistence of victims' families had persuaded him to accept. When confronted with evidence of wrongdoing, many would have walked away. The governor continued. When threatened, many would have remained silent. When dismissed by authorities, many would have abandoned their pursuit of truth. But some individuals possess a moral compass that will not be deterred. The hunter shifted uncomfortably as the governor recounted the basic facts of his discovery and subsequent investigation. He had heard the story retold countless times now, in newspaper articles, television specials, congressional testimony, but it still felt surreal, as though it had happened to someone else. His gaze drifted to the group seated in the front row, family members of identified victims who had traveled from across the country for the ceremony. An elderly couple clutching a photograph of their son who had disappeared while hiking in 1975. A middle-aged woman who had spent 43 years searching for her missing sister. These were the people who mattered, not the politicians and officials making speeches about justice and accountability. When his name was called, the hunter approached the podium with reluctance, accepting the medal and certificate with a nod of acknowledgement rather than pride. The applause echoed across the Capitol steps. Cameras flashed, but he stepped aside quickly, unwilling to bask in recognition built upon others' suffering. In his brief, required remarks, he spoke not of his own actions but of the victims and their families. "This isn't about one person finding something in the woods," he said, his voice unaccustomed to public speaking. "It's about decades of lives stolen, truth suppressed, and a community unknowingly at risk. The real recognition should go to the families who never stop searching, and to those who will never come home." The ceremony concluded with the governor announcing the establishment of a permanent memorial to be constructed at the edge of the national forest, a reminder of both the lives lost and the importance of transparency in governance. The hunter listened with mixed emotions, wondering if any monument could truly capture the horror of what had occurred beneath the forest floor. Later, at a private reception for the families and key figures in the investigation, the hunter found himself approached by the federal agent who had initially helped secure the evidence and launch the official investigation. "Remarkable work by the Oversight Committee," she said, nodding toward several members of Congress who were in attendance. "They've authorized the most extensive declassification process I've seen in my career. Nearly 5,000 documents released so far." The hunter nodded. "Any closer to understanding why? Not just how, but why they did these things?" The agent's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. The official explanation remains consistent. Cold War paranoia combined with scientific ambition unchecked by ethical constraints. They wanted to enhance human capabilities to create superior operatives for national security purposes. "You don't sound convinced," he observed. She glanced around before responding quietly. "Between us, there are inconsistencies in the technical documents. References to exposure protocols and integration studies that don't align with conventional radiation research, even by 1970s standards. And certain files remain classified despite the declassification directive. Something about the core purpose still isn't fully disclosed." Before he could press further, they were interrupted by the reporter, who had also received recognition for his role in exposing the scandal. His investigative series had expanded into a book that now topped the national bestseller lists. "They're talking about a congressional medal next," the reporter said. "National recognition. You deserve it." The hunter shook his head. "I don't want more ceremonies. I want accountability, justice for the families, and assurance that nothing like this could happen again." "The system failed," the reporter acknowledged. "Multiple systems, really. Local law enforcement, federal oversight, journalistic watchdogs, all failed for decades. But eventually, the truth prevailed." "At what cost?" the hunter asked quietly, his gaze returning to the victims' families. "And how many other secrets are still out there, buried in remote places, protected by those with power?" He excused himself, finding a quiet corner where his wife and daughter were engaged in conversation with the young deputy who had risked his career to provide crucial information. The deputy had since been promoted within the reorganized sheriff's department, part of the county's effort to rebuild trust in local law enforcement. "How does it feel?" his daughter asked as he joined them. "Being called a hero?" "Uncomfortable," he admitted. "I'm a hunter who found something wrong in my woods and reported it. Everything that followed was just necessary." His daughter smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why they're calling you a hero, Dad." Autumn returned to the forest, painting the landscape in fiery hues of red and gold. The hunter resumed his traditional dawn patrols, though in different sections of the national forest. The area surrounding the facility remained restricted, cordoned off with security fencing and warning signs far more substantial than the single weathered sign he had ignored that fateful day. Life had settled into a new rhythm. He had returned to his job at the lumber mill, where co-workers initially treated him with a mixture of awe and unease, before gradually reverting to normal workplace camaraderie. His wife had established a support group for community members dealing with the psychological impact of the revelations. Their daughter had returned to college, now focused on environmental law rather than general environmental science, a change directly influenced by what her father had uncovered. Yet normalcy remained elusive. The hunter's perception of the forest, once his sanctuary and second home, had fundamentally altered. Every unusual sound or sight now carried potential significance. The sense of being watched occasionally returned, especially when he ventured near the boundaries of the restricted zone. Whether this was psychological aftermath or legitimate intuition, he couldn't determine. The national attention had gradually subsided as newer scandals captured the media's focus. The congressional hearings continued, but with diminishing coverage. The class action lawsuit progressed through the courts at a glacial pace. The health monitoring program remained active, its findings periodically reported in medical journals rather than front-page news. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly 1 year after his initial discovery, the hunter stood at the edge of the restricted zone, observing the transformation. The simple chain-link fence and sparse warning signs had evolved into a substantial security perimeter. Concrete barriers, advanced monitoring equipment, and armed guards at checkpoints. Beyond the fence, he could see teams in protective gear moving methodically across the landscape, conducting what he knew to be the ongoing decontamination effort. He had obtained special permission to visit the perimeter today, accompanied by the federal agent who had become something of a liaison between him and the various agencies involved in the investigation. She stood several yards back, giving him the privacy this moment demanded. "They've removed over 8,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil," she commented when he eventually rejoined her. "Groundwater testing shows decreasing radiation levels. The containment strategies are working." The hunter nodded. "And the deeper research? The things you mentioned at the ceremony?" The agent hesitated. "Some progress. We've identified connections to 3 other facilities, one in Nevada, one in Alaska, one overseas. All part of the same program, all officially terminated in the late 1970s. "Officially," he repeated, the skepticism evident in his tone. "There's something else," she added, extracting a folder from her vehicle. "This was approved for disclosure to you specifically, given your role in the investigation. The Oversight Committee felt you deserved to know." Inside the folder was a single document, a partially redacted report dated 1987, 10 years after the facility had supposedly been decommissioned. It detailed observations of unusual biological anomalies in wildlife within a 5-mile radius of the former research station. The description of these anomalies, cellular mutations, behavioral changes, unexplained physical capabilities, sent a chill through him. "This confirms monitoring continued long after the official shutdown," the agent explained, "and it suggests that whatever they were studying had effects beyond the immediate test subjects." The hunter recalled the unnatural silence in the forest surrounding the bunker, the strange behavior of animals he had encountered. "The forest knew," he said quietly. "It was trying to warn anyone who would pay attention." As they prepared to leave, the hunter noticed something that momentarily stopped his breath. A raven perched on a nearby tree, watching them with that same unnerving intelligence he had sensed the day before finding the bunker. For a moment, it seemed to lock eyes with him before spreading its glossy black wings and disappearing into the canopy. Some mysteries, he realized, would remain. The full truth about what had happened beneath the forest floor, what was still happening in other hidden facilities, might never fully emerge into the light. But he had done what one person could do: uncover enough of the truth to force acknowledgement, investigation, and at least partial accountability. That evening, sitting on his porch as twilight descended, the hunter cleaned his rifle, the same Remington 700 that had accompanied him on that fateful hunting trip. The familiar ritual of maintenance brought a measure of peace, connecting him to the person he had been before, a man who understood the woods, respected their power, and moved through them with quiet confidence. His wife joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Planning to go out this weekend?" He nodded. "Opening day Saturday. Northeast quadrant away from—" He didn't need to specify. She understood. "It's still your forest," she said gently. "Don't let them take that from you, too." The hunter nodded, reassembling the rifle with practiced movements. It was still his forest, changed, wounded in places, but ultimately resilient. Like the truth itself, nature could be temporarily suppressed but never permanently contained. It would find its way to the surface, pushing through whatever barriers were erected to constrain it. Dawn broke over the eastern ridgeline, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. The hunter stood motionless in a small clearing, rifle slung across his back, watching as the forest awakened around him. Birds called from the canopy, squirrels chattered, and somewhere in the distance, a deer moved through underbrush. This was the same ritual he had performed for decades, this communion with the wilderness in its most vulnerable moment of transition from night to day. The same, and yet profoundly different. He knew now what secrets the land could hold, what darkness might lurk beneath a seemingly untouched forest floor. He understood that wilderness could be both sanctuary and prison, that beauty could conceal horror, that silence might be either peace or warning. Yet he returned, drawn by something deeper than habit. The forest had been violated, but it endured. The truth had been buried, but it had found its way to light. There was a lesson in that persistence, a reminder that, ultimately, natural order prevailed over human attempts to subvert it. The hunter inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the crisp autumn air. The scent of pine and decaying leaves filled his senses. Familiar, comforting, real. This was still his place in the world, changed, but not destroyed. As the sun cleared the horizon, illuminating the clearing in golden light, a raven called from nearby, that distinctive, intelligent vocalization unlike any other forest bird. The hunter turned toward the sound, spotting the glossy black form perched on a branch at the edge of the clearing. For a moment bird and man regarded each other, 2 sentient beings acknowledging a shared awareness of the forest's secrets. Then the raven spread its wings and launched into flight, disappearing beyond the tree line. The hunter adjusted his pack and moved forward, following ancient deer trails deeper into the woods. Some questions would never be fully answered. Some wounds would never completely heal. Some secrets would remain partially buried, waiting for another person willing to look beyond warning signs and convenient explanations. But truth, like water, found its path eventually. It might be diverted, contained, or temporarily trapped, but given time and persistent pressure, it would break through any barrier. The hunter had become a channel for that inevitable flow, and though the cost had been high, he could find no regret in his choice. The forest had always been his teacher. Now it had given him its most profound lesson, that beneath the surface of the ordinary world lay extraordinary truths, waiting for those with courage enough to see them. As he disappeared into the dappled shadows of the pine forest, the hunter carried with him not just the weight of what he had discovered, but the responsibility of knowing that other secrets remained, in other forests, other communities, other seemingly ordinary places, waiting for someone else to ignore a warning sign and discover what lay beyond. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling investigative stories that expose the shocking secrets hiding in plain sight. The truth is out there. Sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to look past the warning signs.